Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Edward Sandoval wash processed Colombia from The Real Bean. And there's the bag right there. And The Real Bean, based out of Seoul, Korea, and they were a suggestion to us by Jeff Park. So shout out to and thank you to Jeff for the suggestion. This is The Real Bean's first ever appearance on this channel. This is a coffee roaster I had zero familiarity with going into this review. And we did pick this coffee up from Airworks as part of one of their limited releases, given that The Real Bean was on our suggestion recommendation list. So we will see how this one turned out. This is right here is day 42. And recipe we went with for this coffee was our standard recipe at a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 96 degrees Celsius, about 205 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the V60, which indicates a more medium fine grind roast profile for this coffee. So the majority of Korean coffee roasters that we've reviewed on this channel up to this point have been on the notably more developed side of things. And I feel like the coffee roaster we've reviewed in Korea that is the most developed is Hocus Pocus, and I would say that this one is probably closest to that among the Korean coffee roasters we've reviewed. So I would say it's either on the slightly lighter side of that medium or on the more developed side of that light medium, as this one definitely had a fair bit of development to it. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 17, first impression, and we did opt for the V60, and the coffee immediately had plenty of the robust qualities to it, while it still offered a lingering peach aspect that was presented in a slightly more developed sense. And as I mentioned, I definitely felt a lot of those roasty qualities right from the onset within this coffee. There was some citrus in the intermediary with a little bit of caramelized sweetness, so there were some positive things to take away on this first try. Day 20 through the Chemex, and the coffee was a bit better, mostly off brew though, as it did have a fair bit of the listed pear at the forefront, with a bit more of a sugary sweetness and a bit of the peach as well, given a bit more overall fruit intensity this time around. Cup loses a little bit of its structure as it does cool down, offering a more robust and lingering citric quality to it yet again. Day 23 through the April brewer, and the struggles with this coffee do continue as it continues to remain quite robust. There are some better defined fruits shining right off brew. Outside of that, there is a long-lasting lingering citric quality that continues to remain a big issue within the cool down, and that's something we'll discuss a little bit more within the tasting wheel. Day 26 through the V60 was some lower extraction adjustments, lower temperatures, higher concentration, and the coffee is a bit better, though it didn't necessarily perform well off brew. That was kind of an interesting contrast, given that up to this point, the best of this coffee was right off brew. However, this time around, it didn't necessarily seem to offer the same level of sweetness and intensity in terms of the fruit profile. A slight bit of the roastiness is felt, as it is a bit more prominent in the fruit sense this time around, much more on the cool down with a better listed peachiness as well as that caramelization of this coffee. Day 29 through the Chemex with the same adjustments, and there were definitely still some mixed results overall, as it does still have a fair bit of the development hindering the overall fruit profile in this coffee, with a notable bit of caramelized sweetness to balance it out. Sugary again, and that's the best thing I could take away from several of these days, was that it did offer plenty of sugary sweetness to it. Day 32 through the V60 was our standard recipe, and the coffee in general was just hindered by the overall development to it, as I feel like it's pretty safe to say that this coffee is a fair bit more developed than I usually like. There is a little bit of the clarity that is just taken away by that very notable and prominent roasty quality to it. It is moderately intense in terms of the stone fruits as well as richer candy attributes, but of course, so they're going to be marred by the overall development of this one. Day 35 through the Chemex was our standard recipe, and there's more consistency as right off brew. It is offering some of the nicer listed fruit aspects right there at that forefront, some candied stone fruits as well as the palm fruits in line with the listed pear aspect. In addition to that, there's a fair bit of citrus that does cool down into a little bit more of a harsher citric tone as well as overall roastiness to it. And day 38, final notes we have through the V60 with our standard recipe, and there are further struggles as it feels like this coffee has tapered off ever so slightly, leaning more heavily into those roasty qualities. Strong palm fruit brightness cuts through the prominent citric qualities, as well as some slightly burnt honeysuckle. I always describe it as burnt popcorn, honeysuckle-like taste to it. Spiced as well, so a lot of different attributes in this one, as I feel like this coffee has lost a little bit of its structure overall. All right, let's go ahead and prep the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have one level 5, so let's go through that, and that is the finish level 5 And I did mention on our third day's worth of notes that this one did have a lingering, strong citrus quality to it within that finish. And that was a big sticking point for me on this coffee, given that it was coming in two directions, most notably that citric quality, as well as the roasty quality to it. And both of those did seem to leave a very lingering and long-lasting sense to them. So for that reason, that level 5 isn't necessarily an ideal level 5, but it definitely skewed a lot more in a direction that I wasn't necessarily a big fan of. One level 4, the acidity level 4, which was a very interesting one to me. The main reason this coffee caught my interest initially was because it was a Chiroso coffee. I did have my pick of a couple of coffees from the Real Bean, and this is one that interested me the most, given that it was a Chiroso coffee and one from a producer that I don't think I've actually seen before. Combined with the fact that this fruit profile actually sounded very much like something I would enjoy, I was expecting it to maybe stew a little bit more on the fruit side of things. And I've had mixed reactions to Chiroso coffees in general, as some do tend to be a little bit brighter, but it's kind of a crapshoot sometimes. And this one definitely had a fair bit of brightness, which was kind of interesting given the overall profile of this coffee. So it is clean there at that level 4. A lot of it is a bit more in line with the palm fruit brightness, as well as that citric fruit brightness, which is also there at that level 4. Both of those things are categorized in that citric quality to it as well. And I would say that it's maybe a little bit more bitter and it's a little bit more harsh than I would necessarily enjoy. But once again, I feel like the overall profile of this coffee did lend itself towards that in general. We'll move on to level 3s. We will start with the sweetness level 3. I feel like that was a little bit of a sticking point for me on this coffee as well, because early on I said, okay, this is probably going to be the best part of this coffee, is that it does have this caramelized sweetness to it. But I feel like that seems to taper off with time, as it was a bit more skewing on the roasty side of things, that more developed side of things. So what was initially a little bit sweeter at the forefront didn't seem to last throughout. Florality, level 3. I mentioned briefly there is that slightly burnt popcorn honeysuckle-like feel to this one, and that was definitely a lot more aligned with those floral aspects. So we're scoring that there at the level 3. Spice, level 3. That kind of crept up in this coffee towards the end, as on the earlier days I wouldn't necessarily say that it had too much of a spiced tone to it. But Chiroso coffees in general can have a little bit of a spiced quality to them, and this one definitely did. And come to think of it, I didn't even think about the fact that this is a Chiroso coffee and they usually have that spiced quality up until now, but that makes a lot of sense. Then it would score there at that level 3. We move on to the saltiness, level 3. Strange bit of saltiness to it, so don't necessarily know what to make of that, but we will go ahead and move on to the berry fruit as well as the stone fruits, both scoring at the level 3. Berry fruit, this one had a little bit more of a robust quality, so a little bit more of those, we'll say, darker berry tones and aspects to this one. And then the stone fruit, the peachiness was presented a little bit more prominently earlier on within this coffee, but the more I consumed it, the less that became as abundant, and as a result, it was toned down to that level 3. On some of the earlier days, I could say level 4 if I was being super generous, but definitely a true level 3 by the end. Smokiness, level 3, that's going to play a huge role in the overall cleanliness, as this one definitely had a fair bit of those smokier, roasty, developed qualities within it. Savoriness, level 3. I feel like you can say that this has a little bit of a spiced tea tone to it, given that those two things did score unusually high for what I was expecting from this coffee. But I feel like that might have been an overall impact of the development of this coffee. And then two other things we're discussing, we'll start with the body, level 3. This one had a little bit more of a medium body to it, which I feel like was fully expected given the profile of this coffee. And then the final thing we're discussing, most important thing we're discussing, is the cleanliness, level 3. Anytime a wash processed coffee does score a level 3 for cleanliness that isn't a Kenyan coffee, there's usually a big reason for that, and the biggest reason usually ends up being the overall roasty, smoky quality of a coffee. And that's definitely what hindered this one, as I would say that the overall definition, a lot of the qualities of this coffee were toned down the more I consumed it, mostly because they did seem to have that lingering smoky quality to them. So as a result, the cleanliness never really stood a chance at scoring that level 4 for me personally, mostly because the profile in this one didn't necessarily offer enough clarity to reach that level. So as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it is a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. As I mentioned, this is what I was most excited about from this coffee roaster going into the couple of reviews that we do have from them. And it's the one I had the highest expectations for as a result. And I would say that the development of this one obviously was not necessarily in line with my own preferences. It's something I've alluded to already a fair bit within this review. And even then, usually I can find a lot of really positive takeaways from a coffee roaster, even if that is the case. There are some coffees that we've reviewed on the channel that have been on the notably more developed side of things that I have enjoyed because I was able to pull something out from it that I really did seem to enjoy. In the case of this one, I would say that there was just a little bit too much of that, and I feel like it influenced the overall results of this coffee a little bit too much. The fruit profiles that we're expecting to have maybe a little bit more prominence to them were definitely toned down relative to a lot of the more smoky developed qualities of this one. So I don't necessarily feel like this one had an ideal balance for me, so it wasn't necessarily my favorite coffee. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to. This one definitely does skew on the more traditional side of things, as a lot of the Korean coffees we've had in general have skewed on that direction. It does offer a fair bit of citric qualities to it and a very long-lasting finish, as well as some pretty interesting brightness. So those are some unique, I would say, interesting qualities to it, what sets it apart from a lot of other coffees. In addition to that, a fair bit of body and texture, so that's the best direction I can point somebody towards on this one, and also the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee or anything from The Real Bean, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it or them as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Edward Sandoval wash processed Colombia from The Real Bean. Thank you for watching.